All right, welcome into another Auburn Live show. Appreciate everybody joining us. It's Monday morning, and you know what that means? It's Monday morning quarterback with our good friend of the show. Joins us every Monday morning, Ben Leard, former Auburn quarterback. Ben, what's up, man? You look like you've been out in the woods.
Yeah, I got a little camouflage. Just got done cleaning my lemon of Dove for the evening. So my kids will be happy. They enjoy eating those things. So we're get cleaned up, but excited to talk about an Auburn win in Fayetteville, man. That's a difficult place to go play and win, especially with as physical as Arkansas always plays Auburn. And any team with Sam Pittman as the coach is going to be a tough get. But I was tickled to death the way those kids played yesterday, and to come out with a win like that, man, and going into an off week and then coming off of a bad Georgia loss, I don't think you could have painted a better picture.
No, I agree. Certainly a big win for Auburn. You know, I think everybody thought it was going to be a close game. I wasn't sure, if Auburn was going to rebound. I thought back to that Penn State game and how I felt like maybe against Georgia State in the first half they were still focused on the missed opportunities against Penn State, and I wondered if that was going to happen again. But man, finally they came out with a fast start. So it's something Brian Harsin desperately wanted, and that was huge to get out to that fast start of 14-3. I think when you look at the game, man, I think it's the kind of game that Brian Harsin. I think that game encompassed what he wants to see from his football team, which is a fast start, which everybody would love to have, but more importantly, guts and determination in the middle of that game when it was not going the other way. I'm telling you, that was one of the more gutsy efforts from an Auburn team I've seen on the road. Arkansas scores right before half. They score right after half. They have all the momentum. Auburn has a couple of 3-and-outs. And for Auburn to make that play in the end zone, that touchdown, and to flip the switch after a third quarter where they just were on the field, for them to flip the switch and have the fourth quarter they did on the road, to just stop their momentum dead in the tracks and flip that game the other way, was incredible. And then the finish, which Brian Harsin talks about, not just finishing drives, but finishing the game.
Yeah.
The way they finished that game, they had a 4.5-minute drive and a six-plus minute drive or whatever. Held the ball for 12 minutes in the fourth quarter. I just think Brian Harsin, I think if he could look at a game, he'd say you started fast, you gutted it out in the middle, and then you finished strong, and you won the game in the end. You were stronger in the end. It was just, I thought it was just kind of the epitome of maybe what Brian Harsin wants to see from his team.
And I think you're spot on. It's they did things offensively that you have seen glimpses of. You've seen a little bit of throughout the season, but not consistent. And in that particular game, I thought Mike Bobo called a tremendous ball game offensively. And listen, you and I have not pulled any punches on the receivers, most importantly. But when it comes down to it, they played unreal. I don't know if they're categorized as any drops on the game. They made big time catches. Demetrius Robertson, obviously, there were players that had not contributed in the passing game that made some big time catches for them. There were 3 tight ends that caught passes yesterday, which is unheard of. Four in an Auburn offense over the last since the days of Andy Fuller, probably. There were just things that happened yesterday to me that I think in 2, 3, 4 years, when we look back on this and we've seen the evolution of Brian Harsin as Auburn's head football coach, I really think that people that dissect performance are going to say that this was the first time we saw that blueprint. This was the first time that you got to see what he wants as the head coach, both offensively and defensively. And man, it wasn't it wasn't the greatest defensive performance. I mean, they were very successful on third downs. We could not get off the field in certain situations. You know, KJ played a tremendous. Their quarterback is you got to tip your hat to him. He's a tremendous football player, and God, I mean, the receivers that they have are very, very talented. But the most important aspect about it is they didn't give up. They didn't quit. They kept playing, kept hard charging, made the plays when they were necessary to be made. And again, that's the biggest portion of it as to what kind of happened on that fumble in the end zone, or the sack that basically turned into a touchdown. And it was Katie barred the door from there.
Yeah. I think, that it was amazing. I looked at it. So that fumble happens. I think before that fumble, Auburn had, I think their last few drives were just nothing. After that fumble, Auburn had 220 yards of offense in 10 points. I think, 17 points. And Arkansas had, virtually nothing. I mean, it was remarkable how that play changed that game. That play and really that string of events. What gets forgotten about in that sequence is the 57-yard punt. If that's a 45-yard punt, they're out there at the 25-yard line.
Right.
And that play doesn't happen. Play calling is different for Arkansas. Kind of gets forgotten, that 57-yard punt that hits and goes down and gets them at the 11. That punt, that play, you come back, D-Rob deep, and the whole thing just got flipped on its head. You talk about the defense. All right, I want to talk about that a little bit because, I thought, looking at the numbers more, and I wrote about it at auburnlive.com, and kind of we do a what we learned, and I just sort of talk about some things that happened in the game. And the defense was one of the things I wrote about. And I actually think that the defense played pretty well. Like, I think they did almost everything they needed to do, minus they couldn't get off the field.
Yep.
I think if you look at it, they forced 19 third downs. Arkansas ran 90 plays. They only averaged 5 yards a play. Auburn averaged more yards a play than Arkansas did. They shut Arkansas was 0 for 3 on fourth down. Auburn did everything but those third downs, and they just and you got to give credit to KJ Jefferson. You have a mobile quarterback. You have Traylon Burks. There's some talent there that can make third downs tough. That was the only disappointing part, because Arkansas's average to go was 7 yards. So not only was Auburn getting them third downs, Arkansas was averaging 3rd and 7, and they converted 10. That is the most disappointing. But I thought overall the game plan, I thought was good. I mean, Arkansas came into the game as an explosive offense team. Auburn didn't give up any 40-yard plays. They gave up one play of 30 or more. They kept everything 20 and under. And Arkansas came into the game as one of the better teams in the country, I think in the top 20 in those 30-plus yard plays and 40-plus yard plays. So I thought from that standpoint, Auburn did their job. They just couldn't get off the field on third down. I think the running game, I mean, the defensive line, they gave up a little bit too much in the running game. That's probably, that was a little bit, there were some holes there where they were getting pushed around a little bit. I'm not sure what was happening. But overall, I thought the game plan was keep it in front. And if they could have just converted a couple of those, got them off the field on some of those third downs. I mean, they held them to 23 points. That offense scored 51 on Ole Miss. I mean, so I think overall they, in this day and age, man, it's all about points. And I thought they did almost everything right.
And man, you think about it, and we're the game to run 90 offensive plays, and we're harping on one aspect. That's the third downs, right? They did so much other great stuff that we're really drawing at straws, basically, when you think about it. I mean, you got Zacoby McClain I think he finished the game with 15 tackles. Chandler Wooten had 10 or 11. I mean, the kids played lights out. I mean, they played a phenomenal game. And really, when you think about it, it was difficult for them to account for KJ on the third downs. And rightfully so. Everybody this season has had a difficult time accounting for him. in the running game. And that is what it is. When you run 90 plays offensively, you average the number of points that they do offensively in every single game. You're bound to give up some plays, but when you really dissect it, you minimize their explosive plays. You obviously minimize their points when they're putting up 51 against Ole Miss, and then Auburn holds them to 23, 2 of which came off consecutive drives. I don't think you could have scripted the momentum to be more in their favor after the opening drive of the second half. I mean, it had totally flipped, but Auburn has done what they did in previous games. They answered, they responded, they did the things they were supposed to do, and they just stayed in it and stayed gritty and played gutsy and played tough the way they're expected to play. And I think that epitomizes the attitude of Brian Harsin. And I just think it's a situation that every game, they're going into every single game, and rightfully so, treating it as a must-win scenario. It is the 1-0 mentality through and through, that we have to win this game in order to keep our goals and aspirations intact. Everything is within sight. They just have to continue to play and evolve and get better. They need Owen back. Obviously, I think I saw today where you mentioned that this open week, regardless of the outcome of yesterday's ball game, could not come at a better time. They need to rest. They need to relax. They need to mend. And in order for them to prepare for what's going to be an unbelievably big game against Ole Miss in 2 weeks, this open week is desperately needed.
Yeah, and it comes at a good time. Look, that they need to get healthy. Ole Miss plays LSU. Ole Miss played Arkansas, which is an exhausting game. Then they play an emotional, wild game against Tennessee. Then they go home and play LSU, and then they go to Auburn. So, hopefully, Ole Miss will be a little bit, maybe they'll be a little bit tired, fatigued, and Auburn should come into that game in a fresh situation where you get a bye week before you play a team that plays up tempo and all that. But yeah, so I thought Auburn's defense did a lot of things right in that football game. That I think when you look at the offense, you mentioned Mike Bobo, and I agree with you, man. I thought he did call a whale of a game. I mean, there were some play calls, especially on that last drive where he pulled out a couple of just masterful calls. The sweep, the Bo Nix quarterback sweep.
Yeah.
And there was another one I can't remember, but he did call a heck of a game. And I think when you look at it offensively, the only negative is just the running game again. Just not quite there against a team in Arkansas that had been gashed the last 2 weeks, gashed. But what I did see is Arkansas went 4 down linemen. That's not generally what they do.
Right.
So let's give them a little bit of credit that they knew, okay, we have to fix something. So they went 4 down linemen, but still Auburn's got to create some running lanes. They ran the ball when they had to in the fourth quarter, at least got 2-3 yards a pop and kind of kept them in it. Bo Nix made some good plays to convert first downs. But they were able to keep the ball on the ground in that fourth quarter. But that's probably the only negative. Is just, again, they didn't even reach Jarquez Hunter and Bigsby didn't even reach 100 combined. Hunter for the second straight game didn't even get 4 yards of carry. So he's kind of coming back down to earth a little bit. But for everything we say about the running game, Bo Nix played absolutely unequivocally the best game of his career. I mean, he was phenomenal. He was so on point. The placement of his passes in that game compared to just the season opener. You go back to Akron, and yes, his numbers look great against Akron. But if you go watch that game, those passes weren't that accurate. It was just it was a bad team. That performance Saturday against Arkansas was on point. I mean, he was really, really sharp, and he was pretty sharp against Georgia, if not for those drops. Like we talked about it. He threw some really good balls in that game.
Yeah.
And he followed that up against Arkansas and threw some dimes.
Yeah. Well, the receivers made the catches they were supposed to make. They made the plays that were necessary to be made. He made the throws that were needed to be needed to be made, and ultimately they capitalized on those opportunities. Third and longs, he was making the throws to the tight end. The guys made the catches that they needed to make, most importantly. And I think it was one of those instances where they kind of put it together. And I think that was the situation. They put the game together holistically, and they were able to capitalize on it and have some success. Again, if you're going to go and draw, look at, real tight situations, kind of like we're talking about Auburn's defense on third down, the running game was questionable. Obviously, they didn't have the success that you would have expected Auburn to have against Arkansas in the run game. But I truly think that the adjustment that they made in their defensive front by putting 4 down linemen, that exposed them in the passing game. And so ultimately Auburn was able to capitalize on some, deficiencies that they have in their secondary. And I don't think Arkansas, they took for granted Auburn being able to make the catches that they made, because Auburn has not shown the ability to do so thus far into the season. So I think it was a huge uplifting situation for Auburn to be able to make the catches. The receivers made plays, tight ends, running backs. Bo, obviously, again, I think to date, even above the LSU game, I think to date that was his best performance as Auburn's quarterback throughout his entire career. The accuracy, the leadership, making the plays with his legs, and they weren't miraculous plays. They were called quarterback runs that he made the plays and converted the first downs. Obviously, the last touchdown was just I'm still baffled by how those guys did not know that there's no way in hell that Bo Nix was going to slide. I mean, that was not going to happen. It's like he totally caught those guys by surprise by, making one cut and walking into the end zone. So I was ecstatic. I mean, I'm, super proud of his resolve and how he's playing. There's still momentum and there's still opportunities for growth and development, but I think they're definitely moving in the right direction. And I'm excited for an off week. I think they need it, but I'm extremely excited to see what's in store for the Ole Miss game.
Yeah, that's gonna be a fun game. Bo Nix 21 of 26, 292, a couple of touchdowns. I wasn't really bothered when he threw that pick. That the reaction on Twitter was kind of odd, because they were like, "Oh, what a bad throw!" The interception, it didn't even bother me, because I thought it was a deal where they said, "Hey, look, there's 2 minutes. Just take a shot, and it'll be like a punt."
Yeah, make a play.
Now, it wasn't a great shot. Yeah, it wasn't a great shot. So I wasn't worried about the pick too much. But
Hope, it wasn't the best ball he's ever thrown. It wasn't a great ball. But again, it wasn't on a 5-yard out that put them in position for a pick six. I mean, it was, if I'm not mistaken, it was a third down throw. I think.
3rd and 4.
So I mean, it was, and basically that, while you would have loved to have had been an explosive play, right, for a pickup of 20 or 25, it was no worse than a punt situation. So I'm like you, I wasn't beat up over the interception. You hate to see it happen, but then again, you're like, man, it is what it is. You take shots like that. These DBs are good players in the first place. They're going to make plays, and you just got to make a little bit better throw.
But he bounced back, didn't let that bother him. And yeah, I mean, look, Bo Nix has flipped the narrative on its head this year. He has been he has struggled on the road. Let's say that. We all know that. And now you look at it, and not just the fact that he's now won back-to-back conference road games, but Bo Nix played well at Penn State too.
Well, they
didn't come out on top, but he's those 3 big road games. He has not been the reason they lost Penn State, and he's probably the reason they won the other 2.
Yeah. Well, and 2, think about this, and other than, and I am not a historian when it comes to stats or whatnot. If I'm not mistaken, during Gus Malzahn's tenure at Auburn, the only ranked team that he beat on the road was Texas A&M in 2013.
Let's see. He beat Ole Miss in 14 on the road. That wild game
That's right. So we're at 2.
But then you get then you I'd have
He
to go
never
look it
he
up. But then
never
you
he
get
never
dicey.
beat he never beat LSU
Georgia
down
or
there. He
Alabama, yeah,
never.
on the road, yeah.
So Brian Harsin possibly has matched in his first season, has possibly matched Gus Malzahn's output on beating 2 ranked teams on the road in his first season as head coach. I love it. And we're not talking about easy places to play either. So man, I know you and I both have been this way. I'm a big believer. I love the way he treats the kids. I love his message. I love the way he walks into the locker room after a win. They celebrate as a team. I mean, all the things that they're doing, man, it's just the right way to do it. And I think it's ultimately gaining more and more momentum, most importantly inside that locker room. And I think that's going to pay major dividends.
Yeah, I would agree. One of the things he said after the game that I definitely caught my attention was he was talking about it's about the team offense in general, but the wideouts as well. Is he said that he said they started staying after practice last week, um, and he said that he's starting to see guys hold themselves to a higher standard. He basically said the standards um, the standards that these guys are setting for themselves. He thought last week there was a little bit of extra accountability from the team, and that's a big deal to hear him say because that's what he's all about. He's all about the culture and the little things and living up to that standard. And so for him to say, kind of, I saw a little bit of that from the guys. That's not a statement that I take lightly from him, and you see it translate on the field. You
Yeah.
saw everything translate basically onto the practice field. So we'll see how the rest of the season plays out. But man, we could look at this game and say this game things started to take root. I
Yeah.
think you know what I mean.
I think that's exactly right. I think this, and he, going back to that comment, man, he's not going to say things like that unless he believes it, or most importantly, I think unless he witnesses it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
and so you're right. You're exactly right. You've got to take all of that in stride, and for him to say that, he is experiencing or seeing, really kind of seeing the fruits of his labor. And that's got to be a prideful moment for him as a head coach. And he's able to do that. He's able to do that while his team is winning games. And I think that makes it resonate that much more with the players, in the sense that, guys, you see what we are doing. If we continue this, we will be successful. If you continue to make these strides, if you continue to do that little bit extra, it will help and it will pay dividends. Mark my words. And he's being able to use that. He's being able to use the wins. He's being able to use the success really kind of as leverage to get more out of the kids, week in and week out. Because ultimately, man, Georgia's not as good as they are by just showing up to practice. Alabama is not as good as they are by just showing up to practice. You have to do more than what is asked of you by your coach. That's it. How much more are you willing to put in? How much more effort? How much more time? How much more are you willing to do in order to win and compete for championships? And I think that's the message that Brian Harsin, it's clicking. It's hitting home with these young men. And you're hopefully going to see those things pay up at some point in the near future.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it. And once you see it happen, then think about what that does as a player. Once you see some of those things happen and good things happen, okay, now there's that extra belief. It's one thing to believe; it's another thing for you to see it come to fruition. And then that's when that stuff starts to take root. So now they got an off week, rest, self scout at a perfect time to get that win, and then now go self scout, improve, and just really practice and work on little things, and then get ready for a big one against Ole Miss. That if you pull that out at home, well then the whole season comes down to you got Mississippi State and Carolina who you're better than. The whole season comes down to to A&M on the road in
Yeah.
Alabama. And now you've narrowed your season down. If they pull that off against Ole Miss, you've narrowed your season down even more to the potential of gosh, now you're looking at, can we get to 9 wins? I mean, that we talked about 8-4 but being a really good season. And then boy, when they lost to Penn State, we thought, gosh, 8-4 would be a great season. Now they already got one loss. And now you're looking at it going, if they can pull it off against Ole Miss, gosh, 9 is a serious possibility.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how this team's developing, but they're certainly doing all the right things. All right, man. Appreciate you joining us. Appreciate everybody listening. AuburnLive.com. Go subscribe if you're not a part of that. Make sure and listen to us across all platforms. Watch the show on YouTube. You can see Ben's sweet camo if you're listening on audio. Go check it out, man. He's got some dove, some feathers in the background.
I'm getting it. I've got an NIL deal with Mossy Oak. So
man, well, that was a good decision by them.
yeah.
All right, dude. Appreciate it. I guess we'll be off for a week. Auburn has a bye week, and so well, I guess we can come back and just talk nothing but Ole Miss next week. Maybe we'll do that. Ole Miss coming off that wild game against Tennessee. Tennessee, yikes! We won't even get into that. That was a rough look for them. All right, dude. Thanks so much, man.
All right, Hope. Take care, buddy. War Eagle.
All right. Thanks, everybody.